Hi everyone. I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about the use of evidence. We've gotten to a place in the course where we are working more specifically on how to construct an argument and the best way to support that argument. We've already discussed the different types of essays that are out there. As a reminder, they tend to be grouped into 3 or 4 broad categories. One is expository. Expository essays are explaining how something works. They're like a process or a description. There are persuasive essays and persuasive thesis statements, and those are essays where you're trying to get someone to come around to your point of view, to convince them of your side or something. These are often pro-con papers. Argumentative essays are similar to this, where you're trying to argue for your own position on something, and a position in the sense of being like right or wrong, supporting it, taking a stand on something specifically. The type of essays we're writing in this class are generally analytic essays, and they're kind of in between expository and persuasive. They're going to have elements of exposition. You're going to want to explain things, but they're also going to have elements of the persuasiveness in the sense that you are trying to use evidence to convince your reader about how your understanding of a topic is a valid one. What makes analytic papers a little different is that they're more about understanding how something works and understanding or helping people understand like the inner dynamics of something. So, what makes, for instance, with your identity essays, what helps us explain how race in America works, using your own life as an example. So you're analyzing how race works, and you're analyzing the effect that race has had on your identity and saying, okay, in my experience, race has been connected to, for example, class, and that economics and racial identity are intimately tied. And then I would use an example from my life to show and demonstrate how that connection works. So your essays are analytic essays. And as you're trying to develop your argument that is leading to your analysis, you're going to want to think about how you use evidence. Now, in any paper that you're writing, you're going to be asked to make an argument. An argument just means taking a position and using evidence to support that. So you have to think about, okay, what kind of argument am I making, and what type of evidence would be best suited to making that argument. Since we're doing an analysis, you're going to want to think about, okay, so what evidence would support the analysis that I'm making? Specifically with the autoethnographies, you're analyzing your own life and how identity works there. So that's going to determine in part the type of evidence you use. Since this essay is about your life, some of the evidence that you use is going to be details from your own life, personal experience. And it's also going to be observations that you've made about your own life and your own circumstances. Now, you will experience other essays that do not allow you to use personal experience or your own observations. They might just want statistics and data. You always have to think about what type of evidence is best suited to the argument that I'm making, and what type of evidence counts as evidence given that context. For this paper, you can use details from your own life, and you have to use 2 outside sources as well. So those are the details. Those are the things that count as evidence for this specific argument. But do know, depending on the field that you're in and the class you're in, that might vary. Now, as you start to use the evidence in your paper, always keep in mind that evidence does not speak for itself. You are using that evidence in the service of your own argument. So anytime you introduce evidence into your paper, you need to explain what the connection is between that evidence and the larger claim that you're making. So you're always walking your reader through the evidence and its connections. Generally, after you introduce the evidence, you'll need to explain how and why that evidence connects to whatever claim you're making. And that's what pushes evidence from being just facts or details into the category of evidence. It's the explanation, that you cannot assume that this evidence will just self-evidently declare itself, that I'm going to know how this connects to your argument. That's the job of the paper. That's the job of your argument. So anytime you introduce evidence, there needs to be an explanation to go along with it. Because of that, you should almost never end a paragraph on a quote or on a piece of evidence. It should always end and begin in your own voice. Begin a paragraph with a topic sentence that connects and develops your thesis. End the paragraph with a further analysis of what evidence was introduced there. And this is a good check as you go through. If you notice any paragraph that has a quote at the end, you need another sentence there. If you notice any paragraph that does not have any evidence, you need more evidence there. Every paragraph, aside from maybe the introduction and conclusion, should have specific evidence. And when I say what that includes, that evidence needs to be specific details. It's not just general claims about race has been important in my life. That's not evidence, that's a claim. Race has taught me how to be a leader. How so? You need evidence that demonstrates the claim that you're making. So make sure you're making a distinction between claim and the evidence that supports the claim. Finally, in terms of what the evidence looks like in each of your paragraphs, as I said, shouldn't end a paragraph with a quote. You should also not let any quote or information kind of stand on its own. You want to integrate that evidence into your own sentence structure. So you want to always introduce it in some way. For instance, like, as Youngblood argues in her paper, X, Y, and Z, and then I would quote. And then after that, I'd have another sentence analyzing how that quote relates to my own purposes. You might also not have a full sentence. You might integrate like a part of a sentence into your own longer work just to give it a kind of more specific wording and authority. So not all of your evidence has to be like a full sentence or a full quote. You can have like 4 or 5 words that you're pulling from someone else and putting it in your own context. And that makes you seem more authoritative, that you're using the details rather than letting the details use you. It's sometimes difficult to know whether there's enough evidence in a paper. The best way to look is to do an outline of the paper after you've written it and make sure that each of your main points has evidence supporting each claim that you're making. Doubt everything. Try to read your paper as if you're an objective observer and who is questioning any claim that you're making. And so any claim that you come up is like, is there evidence for that? How so? Where do you see this happening? Ask yourself a lot of questions. And always be thinking about, does this evidence fit with the argument that I'm making? Does my evidence match up to my bigger claim in the topic sentence? And then does that topic sentence connect clearly to the thesis? So I hope that helps. Of course, bring any questions you have to me. There's a handout associated with this video, which should be connected somewhere nearby, about use of evidence. And also there's some chapters in They Say, I Say that are particularly useful in helping guide you through how to integrate evidence into your own sentences. So have a look there as well. All right, take care. Bye.